Good evening and welcome to this third and, at least for now, last installment of Dear White Bosses. We ain't playing with y'all no more.
Ain't playing.
The musical. It's like, so there will not be any music actually, but unless towards the end of this we just feel like it, but in any case, I'm Tamara Seiler. I am one of the people who I guess we have started this journey back in June with my fellow colleagues to just sort of bring some intelligence to the table with regard to helping to guide young professionals of color, and to remind everybody where we've been. We started out actually with 2 sessions that were really focused on the experience for those professionals of color and really digging into that experience. But then we felt it would be remiss without talking to those who manage those professionals of color. So that started Dear White Bosses 1. And then that had such a wonderful reception. We went to Dear White Bosses 2. And then this is like Dear White Bosses 3. And of course, now we are in the aftermath of an election. And so I think we talked briefly before the election about, maybe some suggestions of how to sort of create space in advance of the election and maybe giving people some space. But it'll be interesting to hear what happened post-election. But before we do that, I'm going to let my fellow panelists introduce themselves. So I'll call you all out based on who I see. So I'll start with Ralph.
All right, thank you. I am Ralph Figueroa. I'm at Albuquerque Academy. I'm the high school representative, although I spent 10 years on the college admissions side, and glad to be joining you again, bringing my perspectives, which include my perspective as a reformed but still technically licensed attorney. I'm a graduate of UCLA Law School and a member of the California Bar. So I'm a reformed attorney, but bringing that perspective to a lot of this discussion as well. Okay, and I'm going to toss it to Jess Lord.
Which one of us? Which Jess Lord? Thanks, Ralph. I'm Jess Lord. I'm at Haverford College. I've been there as the Dean of Admissions since 2005, and I've had the real privilege of being part of this group for the Dear White Bosses series. So this is my third time being with this incredible group, and I'm really happy and excited to be here with all of you tonight. I will pass things to you, Derek.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Derek Brinkley. I am the Assistant Vice President of Undergraduate Admissions at Columbia College, Chicago. I've been in admissions now for 12 years, something like that. And am so honored to be here with these wonderful, wonderful people to kind of wrap up our Dear White Bosses series for now. So glad to see you all this evening. Daryl, take it away.
All right, thank you, Derek. Hi, everybody. I'm Daryl Jones with Gettysburg College. I have about 7 titles. Don't worry about them. Just know that what happens here is that Tamara helps me to keep it realer than real. So be ready, because part of the reason I care about this whole piece is simply this. We've had a summer of unrest and protest and support that seemed to die down as people got distracted. We've always had issues dealing with equity and inclusion in the profession. So, because I am someone who started in the finance industry, left because I didn't like the greed, but now wants that greed to maybe work for me a little bit so I can retire someday, I can't leave without getting this work done. So having this crew, being with this crew together, along with the Accept folks, I mean, we're making a difference. So we're going to keep pushing and keep stamping out inequities. And I have a new catchphrase for those of you who have not been with us, or those who have. You will hear me bust out something in the middle of this that belongs on a t-shirt when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's all I'm telling you for now. Marcus. Marcus is joining us for the first time, but tell him who you are.
What a teaser, Daryl. Like, I'm curious what this revealing is going to be. My name is Marcus Mason Bibbett. Pronouns are he, him, his. I worked in higher ed still work in higher ed to some extent. Have been doing this work for a little more than 10 years. And right now, I am not at anywhere specific because of more or less over the whole of my professional career because of white bosses. So I am here to talk about that, I suppose. So it's good to be here. It's good to be in good company.
Well, awesome. So I was actually just checking. I was like, I think people can
Did Jess go?
share their video if they want, if they want to. So everybody should have that ability. If you want to come on screen, you can stay muted, of course, until you have something to say. But we will, be creating space, I think, for you to actually participate tonight. So
Yeah, come on in, folks. We'd love to see you. We wanted this to be a different kind of feel tonight.
And so, because there isn't a large group of us, and I think if you're here, hopefully you do want to engage with us, and we're so pleased to have you. And I don't know if any of you have, if any of you have done all three of these, then you deserve an. Oh, there you go. So you deserve you deserve an award. You've been at all three. So November 3rd, 2020. I'm not, is there a badge? Like, Marie, make note of that. We may need to send out Marissa a badge of honor to say that participated in all three. And I think anybody who's here for all three deserves an award to listen to us all that time. So, November 3rd, it's not quite over. But I think there is a path to it being over. So, and I don't know if people created, what kind of spaces they created for their people. I know that several of us had said with the previous one that we weren't even like requiring people to work on that Wednesday. And so, regardless of what happened, and obviously we can't assume that everybody was happy with the outcome. But I also think that even if you were supposedly happy with the outcome, there's nothing to prepare you for the fact that, now 72 million of your fellow Americans have, validated a thought that perhaps people are not. And so I don't know. I'm gonna let my fellow panelists. I mean, what do you all want to say about that? I mean, we had a little bit of a discussion that morning with our staff, and kind of just giving people that space and grace. And we started our work late. I mean, to me, some of the biggest, I guess, response to that is to do the work that I do. And so, right after that meeting, we started making decisions on QuestBridge applications. And so, nice. I think sometimes the best thing you can do is to get back in the trenches and try to create access and opportunities for those who don't have them. And so that was my response to the day. But anything my fellow panelists want to share, or anyone who
I just want to jump in briefly and say I put up my background, which shows the most important results of November 3rd, which is my wife getting reelected to the New Mexico legislature by 17 points. So after that, it was all good for me. So go Natalie.
Well, first, a shout out to LaWanda there with that virtual background. You're winning. So here's part of what I want you to think about, folks. Yes, people can vote for whomever they'd like, and that is our right. But it's a privilege to overlook racism and say, well, it's about my economics and my taxes. And lest anyone forget, in the very beginning, the failure to immediately disavow David Duke's support, immediately, to take several days to do that, to say very fine people were on both sides after that march, to say stand back, stand by, Proud Boys. I don't have the privilege to overlook that. Would I like my taxes to be lower? Sure. But guess what? There is generational hurt and anger in these bones. So when people say, look, I'm not a racist for supporting certain people, I say, yep, you are right. But apparently, as Tamara and I have said often, that's not a deal breaker for you, so I can't vibe with you. So for me, I can respect people voting for whomever they'd like. But if you have the privilege of overlooking something that has been damaging to generations of me, we have nothing to say, nothing to discuss.
I'd like to jump in. Daryl, you started us off. Love that, right? True. When I think back to the last week and everything that we have kind of gone through over the course of the last week and really the last 4 years, I echo a lot of Daryl's sentiments, right? It is hard for me. Again, everyone can vote for whoever they want. Go for it. Have fun. But me being Black is salient to my own identity. It is how I walk the earth all day, every day. I never get a break from it. I never get a chance to step away from that. And so knowing that people have heard, certain people in positions of power say these things over and over and over again is one of those things that I just want folks to think about. And the other thing that I want folks to maybe think about, and some of you may be a part of, I don't know if you saw this thread on the college admissions counselors Facebook group that has however many thousands of members on the group. And there was a subset of the population which within their right, but they said, this is not a place to talk about politics. This is not the place for politics. We should be talking about the students. We should be focusing on the admissions world. And I think what I would challenge white bosses to think about is that we can't separate that. Politics is our own humanity. Our own humanity has been dictated by the laws in this country, by the Supreme Court, by the various entities that we have, right? Politics are embedded into the fabric of this country and what it is that we do. And so it's impossible, I think, to separate politics from the work that we actually do, right? Think about Betsy DeVos being the Secretary of Education in the president's cabinet. And for me, thinking about how much harm I feel like some of her policies and whatnot has done for our students. It connects directly back to our students. It connects directly back to the funding that we might get for our institutions. I mean, this is all baked in. And so I would challenge folks to just think about, if you are someone who's out there sitting there thinking, but it doesn't have anything to do with what it is that we do. I challenge you to really think deeply about that. Think deeply about how our existence, how the politics really do shape the work in which that we do with our students day in and day out, their lives, what they are bringing to the table to our institution, the support systems we need to have in place at our institutions to make sure that we can support the students as they're dealing with these challenges. All of those things go back to politics. You can't, in my opinion, again, you can't separate the two. And so I think it's just important to keep that in mind as you go through the process. Second, last thing that I'll kind of say for now is, I think one of the things that I ended up doing with my staff, obviously election day was Tuesday. Tuesday was a really chill day. I didn't want folks to do much anything. Chill out on Tuesday, chill out on Wednesday, chill out on Thursday. So folks, if they wanted to read some applications, cool, great. If they were so focused on the news and the TV and wanted to pay attention to what was going on, great. It is hard for me as a supervisor, again, to separate my personal self in terms of what I bring to the table. And it's hard for the staff, particularly your staff of color, to do that. And so it was very important for me as a manager of my team to make sure that there was space that was allowed during last week for people to grieve in the way that they want to, celebrate in the way that they want to, whatever that might have looked like for my staff, knowing that at the end of the day, we'll get the apps read. We'll do the work that we need to do. But sometimes you gotta give folks that space to really be able to deal with what it is that's going on in the world on a regular basis.
I think I was just going to add, I think what's always fascinating to me about any of our elections, but specifically the presidential election, is that it only happens every 4 years, right? And I have also found that for the most part, by and large, any admission office that I've worked in, folks have been pretty aligned politically, at least outwardly facing. What they actually do behind the curtain, I don't know. But I think my question becomes, so what do you do within those 4 years? And so now we have a president-elect, hopefully. And then what do the next 4 years look like, right? What happens when there's another unarmed Black individual murdered? What happens when, people without status are in jeopardy of being deported? These things don't just only happen during the time of a presidential election. These things are always happening. And I think one of the things that have been strong missed opportunities in any office culture or environment that I've been in is just the intentional space to kind of see how those marginalized folks or those individuals with historically marginalized identities are faring, right? And so, here in the Midwest, Kenosha's just about an hour, 45 minutes away from Chicago, and you had Jacob Blake. So you have all these things that happen, and yes, it happened around a presidential election, but you have these incidents that happen outside of presidential elections. You have these incidents that happen and don't get coverage from CNN or Fox News. Do you have anyone in your office who identifies as trans or non-binary? When was the last time you checked in on any of those individuals to kind of check, when a trans person was murdered, specifically trans women? So I think that's, what's where I want to focus when I think about the election is like, okay, so what do we do now? What are we doing at the state level? What are we doing at the local level? What are we doing within our office? And how am I supporting, my staff or the team, so that they feel like they belong and so that they feel like they matter and that someone actually knows what may or may not be happening in their world.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's a difficult thing to balance because you do have to support your staff. You do have to make them feel seen and understood. Yet you also have to recruit students, and you have to talk to students of all backgrounds and beliefs. How do you make those students feel welcome and yet held up to a standard that represents your institutions and what you believe? That's a very difficult thing to balance. But that's what you have to do. You have to be able to say, yes, you are welcome. And we want you to participate in this community, but this is what this community does stand for. This is what we will do. This is who we are as an institution. And that's a very delicate balance, and we realize that. And it's easy to just ignore things and just say, well, let's not go there. Let's be at the dinner table at Thanksgiving and not talk about politics. But you can't do that at an educational institution where you're building a community. You don't have that luxury, and you can't take that easy path. And so that's something that you have to think about and deal with directly.
And here's how we tie it into tonight's discussion. Because if you don't have someone who supports education equally for all people in the United States, it's not as if I can tell my professors, hey, well, you know what? You need to dial it back because these kids in some of these urban areas or rural areas or other areas that are underserved aren't being taught as well, aren't being supported as well, don't get the best teaching. So you who's been teaching biochemistry a certain way for a long time, can you just water it down all of a sudden? I can't do that. Second, let's think about it. when it comes to immigration, the crazy part of this is what was Mexico is now Texas. So when people are putting people from Central and South America into cages, I don't look at them as illegal aliens. I look at them as that 3-year-old is a future doctor who's in a cage. That 3-year-old is a future attorney or teacher who's in a cage. So when we look at election politics as educators, what we have to think of is this. The nation's demographics, K through 12, have turned. We already know. So minorities together make up a plurality, and that means those who might identify as Caucasian are fewer than 50% in that group. So if we are to catch up, and if you are to believe that ability, talent, etc., is equally spread, that means education needs to catch up. So that means who we admit in admission, who we advise in secondary schools. I mean, that diversity is just going to happen, and I'm just talking about ethnicity here. So when you look at the direct link to people of color and the work we do and the ethno-demographics of the nation, elections do matter. And again, there are certain things that we as educators, if we care about the persistence and existence of our institutions, we cannot overlook.
You know, where my mind went with all this is, I think very similar, at least I was feeling was quite similar to part of what you were sharing, Marcus, and reminded me of a conversation that we had as a group a couple weeks ago, but before the election, really reflecting on, you know, the incredible energy that existed nationwide after George Floyd was murdered. And then some dissipation of that energy as time goes on. And then there's a lot of energy now around the election, and to what extent will that energy dissipate, and how problematic that is, right? How that is, and again, centering it on the structure of this particular session, this idea of really speaking to what it means to be a supervisor and the roles that we play in our offices, either supervising individuals and also in leadership roles in our offices, is you know, just really keeping central the need for this to be a permanent habit of mind, thinking in these terms and thinking in these ways. And I'm particularly sensitive to this right now. Some of you may know what's been going on at Haverford, you may not, but there was an article in Inside Higher Ed, and it's getting some other attention. But we've just ended yesterday a 2-week student strike. With no classes, no work, no extracurriculars, no nothing, with just incredible frustration about lack of progress towards racial justice and putting an end to, or really making some major and real changes on campus. And the students are right in everything that they were citing. And I actually was grateful for the juxtaposition of this against the election, where I was feeling really, and I think rightfully so, enthusiastic and excited about the presumed and obvious result of the election. And there are real meaningful ways that will improve education at all levels in this country, for sure. I believe that completely. But it's also, to Marcus's point, you know, what are we doing in the intervening 4 years, right? And what are we doing in our own spaces, in our own campuses, within our own offices? But also, you know, Daryl, with your comments just now, you know, I mean, a major issue, in my opinion, is even just structure of curriculum, right? And the ways that curricula are structured. And that's a real issue for me at a small college, because we don't have a really broad curriculum because we're small, right? So there are limited pathways to navigate a curriculum. And I think this is a really intensive problem along the lines of the realities of the changing demographics in this country, and our goals of access, and that part of access is not just opening the door, but is also the thriving and the making available the experience that we promise to any student there for every student who comes to us, and what kind of change that actually requires, and the ways that where we sit for our institutions, whether you're on the high school side or whether you're on the college side, we sit in really important pivot spots for institutions to really lead in some really important and interesting ways.
Well, I know we actually did have we do have an actual event for you tonight, but I do want to take another moment to, because I think Marcus has opened up a door. 4 years, for the next 4 years, there will be a dynamic in this country. This country is divided. One of the things that I saw something that says that said, I think lots of people are saying this is the most divided we've ever been. Now, for a person of color, one could argue it's not the most divided we've ever been. I mean, at least we can go to bathrooms and we can drive in the street and nobody owns us. So those kind of things are, so you kind of have to be careful about, what divided means in terms of, I mean, yes, we do have a divide, but to take it to that extreme in terms of language, I'm not sure that it could telegraph something to people who know that we've always been divided, and it's like for some people we've never been undivided. So, but with that said, for the next 4 years, I mean, if anybody's looking at a map of the electoral how everything came out, you've got a real map of places where you may have students who don't want to go to those places. You may have staff that don't want to go to those places. And so, and you may say that that's unfair, but, I don't know how many of you bore witness to the Sunday before the election, but in my very diverse town, there were miles and miles of cars driving with flags and blaring horns and making a visible show of force in this town to, say that they wanted that their candidate should win, and that just and it was tough. It was tough watching, that I mean, like that miles and miles of cars, probably thousands of cars, and so you can say that it's unfair, but I mean, I can say that I live in Houston and not Texas, but my state is Texas, and I'm going to have to deal with that for students who already had ideas of what Texas was. And so I think we are going to have to deal with 4 years of people not feeling like they want to go to certain places to recruit. People not knowing if they're safe to go to certain places to recruit. And I think that's we started this journey talking about that safety for people of color and traveling. And I think when we talk about this divide, that's very real. And I think we can't dismiss that. I mean, if you have people that aren't comfortable, you need to be prepared for that, and you need to hopefully respect that and be in a position where you can make decisions on that. We can always encourage people and say, well, maybe, and maybe do the research. But I think if you want people to go to certain places, you also need to make sure they're connected, they feel supported, they know that there are people who are allies. I mean, I see people from different places around. Then, if you want to send someone someplace, they need to know if something does happen, where's their safe space? Who can they turn to? Who's in that area that you are connected with, that you could say, you know what, that person is if something happens, that person is, reach out to them. They are a friend to us. it could be a counselor, it could be another colleague at another college, but somebody who can be a support for them. But that's going to be real. I think that's going to be real for us. And I don't think once we get back in person, I think we have a buffer because many of us will not be traveling this spring. But eventually we will return to travel. We will return to, going to see, kids will return to to going to visit schools. And I think they will be concerned. They will be coming to you if you're a counselor to say, well, is this safe for me to go to? And they'll be asking you. So anyway, I think it's time to move to our scenario. So I'm going to ask one of my colleagues to please take that over at this point.
Yeah, I will start us off. We put a half-hour time limit on ourselves for discussing the election. So thank you for letting us go through that. But tonight we wanted to focus on a scenario in two parts to really get into some very specific questions and a thought exercise about how you would handle a situation that can be very real and can be very unfortunately common. So I'm going to put the first part of the scenario there in the chat for you to read. I can just go over it for everyone. So we want you to imagine that your admission office has a position to spearhead diversity and inclusion work. Whatever the title is, whatever the exact responsibilities, that doesn't matter. That position is occupied by a staff member, typically at the assistant level or the associate level, depends on year to year, sometimes it changes. Okay. Now, the position has been held by 3 different people in 4 years. The current occupant of that position has raised concerns about racist or hostile words or behavior by their immediate supervisor. For purposes of this exercise, we'll assume that you are not the immediate supervisor. There's someone else involved here. So that's sort of scenario A. That's the first thing that we want to throw out there. And we want to start out by asking you, again, inviting you, those of you who have not, to turn on your video so we can see you. We want this to be kind of a little bit of a face-to-face discussion here. And we want to start off with the what is your reaction? What are the things that come to mind? What are the first thoughts when you think about that situation and how you would behave or how you should behave, which are not necessarily always the same.
Well, I think the first thing I would do is assess my relationship with the highest levels of power at the institution, right? Do I have pull? Do I have relationships? Is there a graceful way for me to go over people's heads? Have I done that before? One thing I used to do at one of my previous companies was corner people in the buffet line, not for issues directly like this, but I'd get a senior vice president or someone next to me and just kind of casually drop something when this was a little bit of a tangent, but when there was a policy or something that I knew was just stupid. And if they'd heard about it, they'd want to take care of it because it was stupid and they didn't like stupid things. This is a little more, this has a little more weight to it, but, and nobody's having meetings now with buffet lines anymore, but that's like my first line of defense or attack, I guess, in a situation like this is, who do I know? How certain am I of their viewpoint? And, since this person's supervisor might be at the same level as me or above me or whatever, I think about the chain of command and I think about influencing specific people that hopefully I know and have built up some trust with.
Good. Who else wants to venture a thought, a reaction?
Ralph, and I just want to make sure this gets framed well, because there are some people in here who don't find themselves in a supervisory role, but I guess, and I don't know, we could also talk about, because I think last time we also talked about like a fellow sort of colleague or, somebody who might be in a similar role with you, like, and what that person could do as well. When they know that there's this unrest in the office, if there's a position that they can, or if they can use how they can use their voice in support of that colleague, perhaps.
It's a really good point.
Well, I can chime in. Hi, everyone. I actually used to be on the admission side, but now I'm actually on the high school side. So I've actually made that transition. But in my previous, and I think with Marcus, when he introduced himself, it was kind of like I was ready to leave due to various demands and a little bit of the racial aspect. And actually my last institution I worked at, we dealt with a lot of that, and where we had a little bit of a struggle with our, I guess, in our diversity, with a supervisor who wasn't seeing really the race being an issue, and who we were recruiting in our office and our guests for our recruiters in general and our admissions reps. And so it was a really touch and go. And, we tried to bring allies, I guess, with a couple of our staff members to bring up these scenarios to our director. Unfortunately, I think there was just a lot of heartache in figuring out where, when it comes to our minorities and with our staff of color, it was really hard to push that advocacy. And so for us, it was interesting, is kind of it demolished our office in a way. And that led to actually me leaving, and then led to a whole bunch of other people leaving. And unfortunately, that office tried very hard to keep bringing in new people, and it just, they weren't retaining their staff. So that was a really interesting concept of this kind of scenario actually happening. But it's actually interesting too right now too, for me, is that I am actually in a school in a state that is still figuring out the votes. And to me, I work in a prominently white independent school. And so we are actually doing a reevaluation of our mission. We don't even have a diversity statement. That has been a big issue. And so our I guess I shouldn't say it's a problem, but it is more than anything else. But to have levels of within the school, and is struggling to only have there's only about 4 of us that are of color in our whole faculty, and trying to not necessarily, we have allies, we have we have backing in some ways, but we are now, due to what's happening in the world, has now shook up the school. And it's led to, of course, we want our safety of our students of color, our students, even our white students. We want to make sure everyone's safe. But there's now this really kind of a tug of war of what is the history of the school in the past, and how do we bring it forward in where we are, where we need to be, to make it a safe space. So I think all in this question just brings up so much in just my different life of being in the higher ed part, but now also dealing with almost at the high school level at independent schools. So to me, we're trying to find allies within our institution. We're trying to implement consultants coming in to reevaluate almost an external view, instead of having it all on our faculty of color to try to solve, quote unquote, because it's not on us. So I kind of want to share that, and just know that this is just a really great question. I'm happy you brought this up, because I think it's very hard to see it in both eyes. And I don't know if I'm the only counselor on the now high school side, but I just wanted to share that as well.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you bringing that up. And even coming from a independent school that has a great history of diversity and is a very diverse place, it can still be hard to get the institution to see beyond just the mission statement into the reality of what's going on with the employees and the students and the parents. And it doesn't get easier. But the first question that came to mind as you were speaking are, do we have the words to even raise this issue? What do we say to a supervisor or to our employee if they are the supervisor? how do we even bring up this topic? Do you feel comfortable saying there are issues about your use of race, there are issues about your attitude towards race, there are issues that are of concern and that we need to talk about? Are you prepared to make those kind of direct statements and get this done? You know, you want to practice, you can practice it now.
And I think I would bring up the notion or the idea of like, or the question, what's the culture like, right? I think so oftentimes we talk about people needing to come forward and raise these issues or raise these concerns. However, when you raise it, what happens? You know, not to belittle the experience that women experience disproportionately, but it's almost like sexual assault, right? And so in the sense of, you know, a lot of women don't report sexual assault because they feel as though no one's going to believe them or nothing's going to happen, right? And so, again, I'm not trying to equate those two as being exactly the same. However, it does, the question still remains, what's the question or what's the culture like that would either allow or not allow someone to come forward, you know, with such concerns?
I think that we've identified a number of challenges. I think you mentioned culture. I think you cannot put it on those who are of the marginalized group to lead the conversation to fix it. They cannot do that. And it's like that is not possible. And because, you know, A, they shouldn't have that labor upon themselves in addition to being injured. But B, you know, what are you asking them to do? Like, I mean, you're asking them to lay weight, like to risk like so much. And I don't think, I mean, and I think, you know, you need out, if you're going to really have these conversations, sometimes you're going to need to bring in that outside party that's not, that can be honest with everybody in the room. Because I think, you know, as a person of color, I curate myself. I can't, how many, I mean, I want to say this to the white bosses in the room, you just don't know how much your professionals of color curate themselves on the daily. Like, you know, we have to be very careful in what we say. We have to be very, you know, we have to be, try to be not as, you know, not attack anybody or be, I mean, but sometimes just in saying the words, we're perceived as attacking. Like we don't raise our voices, we don't like, but all of a sudden, like we are perceived as, you know, and you know, the angry Black woman because we just for speaking truth. And so there's no way to be able to lead that conversation. But I also believe that if it doesn't come from the very top, that's a hard road. It can't come from the middle. So you've got to, as a leader, you have to be willing to do that hard work and to make yourself fair. So I'll stop there.
Just to speak on the other side of that as a white person, right? So recognizing that if someone has shared, if a person of color has shared these concerns with you, the other side to me of what Tamara is saying is you as a white person need to respect and accept how much it took for them to share that with you. That is actually an enormous amount of trust that they are placing in you, and whatever, you know, it doesn't feel comfortable to have to confront issues like this. It's difficult, and you may have fear, you may have guilt, you may have lots of different feelings, but you have to just see the responsibility that you have to do something with that information that has been shared with you. And in terms of establishing culture, you know, a really important thing to me is that you can't make an issue be the reason you raise this as an issue of importance, a specific incident be the reason you raise this as an issue of importance in your office, right? So, I mean, I actually feel really fortunate at Haverford that they incorporated in our performance evaluations, and there is a format for this that is formalized, and it actually includes assessment of the degree to which, as an employee, you are supporting an inclusive and diverse community. All right, so that's actually been stated by the institution that this is actually part of everybody's performance evaluation. And you may not have that level of institutional framework and support for this, but you can establish that too if you're in a position to, whether that's in training and expectations. We've talked about this in other sessions in terms of, the work of DEI is the work of everybody in the office. Well, it's also about how you are evaluating people and their performance. And that's not just the work they're doing in recruitment, that's also how they are engaging with others in the office. And so establishing the culture has to happen outside of an incident coming up and being raised. And that if you have brought it up and built that up, as I said before, as a habit of mind for the office of what you should be concerned about and caring about as colleagues across the boards. And if you're setting that tone, if you're in a leadership role, that's starting to build that culture that is really required.
So Jess, are you saying then that out there are offices that sort of compartmentalize and put the DEI work in a box over there, and here it comes, Tamara, like the kiddie table at Thanksgiving? I know, Ralph, this is for you too. These kids aren't grown enough to play with the big boys. They're over there. So is it, when you're looking at this issue of turnover, marginalization, even if there isn't blatant racism, but I want to get back to the scenario, is your tour guide program, is your ambassador program, is your internship program, is your campus visit program, is your way of promoting and giving raises really inclusive? Or are you judging people on a standard in which it's impossible to be successful?
Daryl, you said two words that I think I'd like to pick apart for a second, and that is blatant racism, right? I think this is where I'll just say progressive white folks get in trouble, because I find in my experience, and if it helps anyone, I'm biracial. My mom is Italian, so white. So if it helps, I don't know if that helps. But either way, so I think what happens is that progressive white folks, or just folks in general, it doesn't, but especially progressive white folks, is when they think about racism, they think about blatant racism, right? So it looks like someone using the N-word. It looks like a bunch of white men in Virginia carrying tiki torches. It looks like a lynching. And I think in a lot of our offices and spaces, a lot of our colleagues treat racism like, well, I can't see it, so it must not be real, right? And so it's almost like, those stories where someone's like, is God real? And it's like, well, I can't see God, so God must not be real. And then the argument is, well, I can feel God. It's like, just like I can feel the wind. And so then what happens if we base all of our feelings on feelings or sight, right? It's just like, well, if I can't see racism and I can't feel racism, who are going to be the individuals who are less likely to see it and feel it? And so if you are one of those individuals, then how do you deal with a respected colleague that says, hey, I'm experiencing some racism here, or this is becoming a hostile work environment for me? And then your response is, what are you talking about? I sit across from you every day. I've never seen anyone do anything racist towards you. Then my question would be, what does racism look like?
Girl, that's a word right there. That's real. What does it look like, right? And I think one of the things that I'm going back to when I kind of look at the scenario is I kind of want to focus a little bit maybe on the turnover piece is kind of part of this, right? So again, it kind of says this particular position's been held by 3 different people in 4 years. If you've been in that same office for those entire 4 years and you've seen this turnover going on, what's going through your head, right? As someone who is sitting there experiencing this happening on a regular basis. You're seeing people, a revolving door kind of happening. What role do you play in upholding that white supremacy that might be going on in your office and in your space? How are you complicit in keeping that cycle going, right? At what point, what has to happen in order for you to step up and say something? And that's, I think, what I want folks to also kind of think about is what does that look like? What does that look like when you have been sitting there, for the last 4 years? You've seen 3 different people in this same position. Do you continue on with your own work? Does it spark something in your head to think, hey, something's weird about this?
That's what needs to happen, is that there needs to be a bar that's dramatically lowered for people to recognize systemic racism or white supremacy that's ingrained but doesn't meet the standard of dropping an N-bomb or something that's so blatant, casual, that the way people talk about test scores, the way people talk about a number of different issues, if you're creating an understanding that we want to stamp this shit, we want to stamp this out, that there are examples that need to be put forth as evidence. The turnover should be hitting you over the head obvious. And then there's probably a bunch of other stuff, just trickling all the way down, that any one thing you might point to and say that's not so bad, but is it the culture in that system? So I don't know exactly what those examples would be. Turnover's the obvious one, but the way people talk about certain issues that say, I'm an apologetic white supremacist, but I'm not a racist. I grew up in Orange County, and that's how a huge percentage of the people are. They don't know that they're racist because they're not ever put in a situation where they've got to deal with it. And in a lot of the companies that I've worked for, there are, I don't know quite how to put it, but there are instances that should have been more obvious in retrospect, that what you're seeing is situations that are going to make people of color feel uncomfortable, situations that are, hopefully the lens now I can look back and just cringe, right? But moving forward, I think there's got to be an educational system within the organization that lowers the bar on what's offensive and still acceptable. I didn't phrase that quite right, but
yeah, I think you're saying some great things. And one of the things I think, to piggyback kind of on top of that, Dave, is now think about not being in your shoes as kind of the white person watching this from the outside and trying to get a sense of what's racism, what's not. Now think about the person of color who's experiencing these little microaggressions over the course of their time at a particular institution. And they're questioning whether these things are real. Am I making this up? Am I being crazy? No one else around me is reacting. Okay, so maybe it's just me, right? And so then we start to blame ourselves. We start to beat ourselves up over what our experiences are. We start to doubt our experiences. And then right there, Marcus, gaslighting, right? We're starting to be gaslit when it goes through that process, right? And so think about how you're also trying to figure out whether something someone did is racist or not. I'm doing the same thing on my end, and how that can just wear you down as you're going through your tenure at any one particular institution you might be working for.
And Derek, go ahead.
I've been here for a second, Marcus, just with a little bit of the sort of human resources perspective, some of the legalistic stuff. Early on in my career, I had an employee who I had concerns with, wanted to take some action. And when I tried to do something, human resources said, do you have a record of these things? Is this in writing somewhere? And I realized that I had to develop the record before we could officially take the action. You, as a supervisor, might be in a position where you need to develop the record. And here it becomes a matter of going back to the idea of what does racism look like? It's not your perspective that matters. If your employee is genuinely feeling oppressed or in a hostile work environment or uncomfortable, that calls for you to record that officially. You need to be the person who builds that record for your employees so that if they want to be able to take the action, they have the support of the institution. And I know your reaction is to say, well, let's just talk this over. Let's just work this out. But from a human resources perspective, that's not your responsibility as a supervisor. You need to think about, if this person is making a complaint to me, I need to document that complaint and get that in the record. And you need to start doing that immediately and not put in your perceptions, because you're not the one who gets to decide.
This is another dynamic why it's really important to have this be part of. I saw, Tamara, you mentioned the hiring process. Completely agree. It should be part of job descriptions, hiring processes, the ways people are evaluated. That this is what you care about in your office, and the expectations for how people are engaging within your office space. That's actually a really important part of then being. If you want to call it out, which you should call it out, it just strengthens that and makes it a whole lot easier to do so. And stand up for your employee, your colleague who has brought an issue forward like this.
And we've talked in the past about the fact that HR exists to protect the institution. It doesn't protect, it's not there to protect the individual. So I know sometimes it can be, and I think for those of you who might be dealing with these issues, that can be a challenge, because because often that's what they're going to say, go to HR. And it's like, and then, again, if you're already feeling gaslit, and then HR is like, well, there's not a record, and, it's like, so, and yet, and that's because often we just get lazy I mean, we get caught up in the work of the office, and we're not doing dotting our I's and crossing our T's. But I think we also said that, knowing that this is true, sometimes the solution for that person is going to lie outside your office. You've got to find other allies around the institution that become your sounding boards. And I think for a white supervisor, it becomes, how many opportunities do you create for the people in your office who may be, the only one, who may be, two, maybe two, and don't expect that those two have to get along like automatically going to connect and be the support for each other. They may be very different. It's like, and so I mean, what kind of spaces are you creating for people to get to know other people in other offices, and that may be even doing some of the same work and aligned with the same work? First of all, it's just good collaboration space. But second of all, you can be creating a support system for the people in your office who are, the ones who are the, are the maybe the one or the two, or, maybe the only. So, and I think that sometimes you just have to remember how many spaces you end up in that their voice will never be. And so you have to try to create the opportunity to pave that way for them to get the support that they really need to be able to flourish.
And Tamara, I feel like you're onto something here too, and Jess, you kind of touched on this as well, and you as well, Ralph, with like the human resources piece, right? I think the human resources piece, the hiring, the job descriptions are all crucial and critical, and there is still some ownership on white supervisors and white colleagues, right? So when I think about, I do some consulting on the side, and so I have like one client who's like, I want to redo our whole HR, right? And they said that I want to redo HR so that people do feel safe, coming and bringing these, situations and these experiences forward. And I had this moment where I said, you do realize that's a huge liability, right? And their response was, yes. And I want to shift the culture. I want to make it so that people do feel safe enough to go to HR. And I think that's making a bold statement. That's saying, I recognize that there could be some major litigation that comes down the road, if I don't get this, right. But I think that keeping that or even being afraid of that might serve as some type of motivation for us to get it right. And then the other piece of it too that I'm wondering about, and that I think that so often happens, where our white supervisors and white colleagues become paralyzed, is when it connects to their livelihood, right? And so so many white friends, family, colleagues are like, "Oh, Black Lives Matter, you know, Black Lives Matter, you know, we need to uproot and dismantle, you know, white supremacy." And my new favorite question is, and where's your line? And where do you draw the line that's where you say, and I will not cross that when it comes to dismantling white supremacy, because that jeopardizes my livelihood. I cannot give you my trust. I cannot give the money that my grandparents or parents left to me, you know, and donate all of that to the NAACP. I will not, you know, step out of line with senior leadership and advocate on behalf of my supervisee, because then that puts my job at risk. So I think the question, where's your line? And I don't know, what's your price tag on your livelihood versus someone else's livelihood?
And that gets to the very question I want to ask next. And so granted, there is some sensitivity here, but Dave, you brought up some important points. Actually, all of you have, that drills down to this. What is it that makes people feel unsafe in sticking up for that employee?
Yeah.
In making the report to HR? So we heard livelihood from Marcus, but what is it? You know, it might be you, it might be somebody you know, but I'd like to hear from our participants. What is it that makes you feel unsafe? You know, if you were in this scenario, what would impede you from making the report, following all the steps that you know should be taken if decency in the workplace is part of the culture?
Well, I mean, trust, what would impede me? First of all, I have gone to HR about stuff like this. And I think the whole HR piece is really interesting. You have to know, can you trust them? There's, in the HR office that I'm in, there are 3 people, one of whom I really, really trust. So when I need like real information on how to handle something, I will go to that person. But like, I think to be able to, I think what stops a lot of people is like repercussions, professional repercussions. I'm, stirring it up, creating more problems. That would keep some people from doing it, I would think. Their own, professional reputation or their own place within the system of the school. But I think, one of the best things we can do, like just to be a good boss in general to all of the people who report to you, are to support them and to also make it very clear, like through communication, I will, let's talk about issues you have, let's solve problems, let's communicate, and to just establish a sense of trust and be authentic and honest and supportive of people. And I think, there are a lot of people leading who shouldn't be there. They don't have the right temperament. I mean, gosh, how have we heard that? You do not have the right temperament to lead, Mr. Cheeto. Sorry. Anyway, the personal is always political, by the way. So I mean, I think just establishing functional teams have to have trust. And if you're not engendering trust within your team as a supervisor, you're failing at one of the fundamental aspects of supervising, in my opinion. So.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Rhodey. And I think, and some of you who may have been, again, on the previous call, at least Marissa probably remembers me saying this, is, in the way that I lead my staff, I'm very, very, very open. If I fuck up, excuse my language, but if I fuck up, I admit it to the staff. If I, like, there is a radical honesty that I have with my team day in and day out. And I have found, and again, in my experience, that radical honesty has allowed people to build that trust with you as the supervisor and thus then be comfortable to share some of the kind of challenges. Because again, to one of the things Tamara said a little bit earlier, we are so used to, as folks of color, moderating exactly how we show up in spaces, right? And think about that with your staffs of color as you're going through that process. And so that radical honesty for me has been one of the things that has allowed me to build the relationships that I've needed in order to then help my team thrive, be successful, move forward, do the things that we have been hired and in charge to do, right? So I think that that's one piece that I wanted to address. I think the other thing that, kind of back to what Daryl was kind of saying of, again, kind of where is that line, between Marcus, Daryl, where is that line and where does that lead? And I think that's a hard thing, obviously, I think for white folks, but that's even, hard for me in terms of where is that line that I am going to put my own livelihood on the line in order to make something better for myself, for my other, colleagues of color, and that kind of thing. And I will be radically honest, right now, that I was in a position at a previous institution where I did not speak up about my own experiences. Again, created that narrative. I'm crazy. This is not really happening. Maybe it's just because I'm the new one. All of these stories and narratives that I created for myself in that process. And then, I ended up leaving. I got the job at Columbia, thank God, but, got the job and left. And again, then to see the turnover that happened in my previous position at the previous institution, that part of me, right, Marcus Mason, Marcus knows, Marcus used to work for me, we're on the same team. And so it was one of those things where I didn't know where that line was for me because I was so worried about my livelihood. I didn't want to speak out about things that were happening to me because I wanted to keep my job and I needed my salary and I wanted to make sure I could maintain healthcare and all of those things. And so thus, then I feel like, and I'll say this out loud, and Marcus has heard me say this, I feel like I failed Marcus in kind of his role, because he took over my position at one of these institutions. And I feel like I failed him because I didn't speak out in that way.
Well, first and foremost, you did not fail me. Secondly, you do bring up a really good point, and I would, Tamara, I'd actually love to, and anyone else who is a person of color who supervises other people of color, it is one of the hardest things that I've ever had to do, because I am simultaneously recognizing that I have to, for the most part, get the approval and the buy-in from my other white colleagues, but then also probability says my supervisor is also going to be white. Derek, I think you are the only supervisor of color I've ever had in my entire professional history, right? Which I think says something, one. But then two, there's a weight that I know that you carry, that we all carry as folks of color when we're supervising younger staff, and we have to hold their concerns, their radical ideas for change and making the world a better place, and dealing with folks up the ladder who just don't see it, don't get it, don't want to get it, don't want to change. And then the weight and the anxiety that comes with that, right? Is of trying to be a model, of trying to be a mentor, of trying to assure a young staff or a younger staff, like, I promise you I'm advocating, but they don't believe you because they're not seeing the change quickly enough. And so again, this kind of comes back to the culture, right? And so, Tamara, you touched on it, it starts with hiring. And I agree, it does start with hiring, and it starts with culture, because what I think is happening is a lot of folks are saying, like, we need someone here. We need someone here to do this for us. We need someone here to help us get it together. But you're asking someone to come into a culture that's messed up. I want to be a little bit more graphic and say it's fucked up. Like, you're asking someone to come into a culture that's messed up and fix it. Fix a mess that they did not create, and you're giving them a nice lofty title with a nice lofty salary, with no team, with no support, with no buy-in from anyone else. You have tokenized this individual and set them up for failure in your attempts to reconcile everything that you want to see happen or change.
So I want to toss this now. You brought up so many things right back to, again, our colleagues who are attendees. Because Derek, your point brought up something that we talked about preparing for this. You left a place because of toxicity. You ended up at a higher position at a great place. So the narrative is, well, Derek left for a greater opportunity. How many times have we all heard that? My question, though, Marcus, to your point, and this is something Ralph and I have discussed, and a bunch of us have, what is the line between self-preservation of your job, your income, your home, your bills, and actually being willfully ignorant? Is it this way or this way? How thick or thin is that line? So I want our attendees to think about where willful ignorance can end and where self-preservation begins, or vice versa. And then again, going back to Dave's point, what do we do about it, and what impedes people? You know, Rhodey, you had a great comment. What impedes people from making and taking the right steps to handle these situations?
I have to say something. I haven't said anything in a while. There's been so many things, all the way back to my girl Ruth. I felt like you were looking at me through a window. But to kind of piggyback what Derek was saying, I think we have to be radically honest with ourselves. If you are feeling a certain type of way, if you are feeling anything, you really have to speak up. Like, it's kind of regardless of, okay, whose feelings am I going to hurt, or my paycheck, whatever, you're just going to have to speak up. If it's wrong, someone's going to check you on it. If it's right, someone's going to either back you up or also check you on it. So I think it's going to have to start with us all being radically honest with ourselves as well.
That's great.
I am so glad you spoke up. And I will say, I mean, based on, Marcus, you mentioned me. I mean, I know I have a privilege that many people don't have. I've been at my same institution for 28 years. I know the president. I'm at that point of saying that it is my job to put myself in harm's way, because, come at me, bro. But I know that so many people in my institution do not have that. And so when I can put myself in that way and say what I know everybody's thinking, but people just don't feel like they have the safe space to say it. And and it's at the point now where my AVP knows that it's going to happen. My VP knows it's going to happen. And so, but again, it's a privilege that I have. And I know that, and I've had, and one of the things that I do with that privilege is I go to the people and I say, if you're feeling some kind of way, don't dismiss it. Bring it to me. Let's talk about it. And I will give you validation. And I mean, it's almost been 100%. People will say, I thought I was crazy. It's like, I said, no, this is not right. And it's not going to happen on my watch. And I mean, and I feel we have a pretty accessible office, but it still happens because we have, as you said, we have people in supervisory roles in our office of varying talent and varying temperament. And so I think that, and there's still, and at times we have this kumbaya type of thing going on. The people of color are not required to like everybody in the office. They are required to work with them. They are required to be respectful of them and be respected in return. But the idea that we're going to go to lunch and we're going to hang out and we're going to do all of this, I'm sorry, that may not happen. And that should not be a requirement. And if you're lifting it to that level, and especially if there's been an offense, because I did find out about an offense, and I'm like, and then all of a sudden it got on the person of color saying, well, you can't hold that grudge forever. I'm like, it's not a grudge, but this person has revealed their character to me, and I cannot erase that. And it's like, you want me to sweep it under the rug, and you want me to not only, accept that, you want me to validate it. I can't do that. So, I have to work with this person. That is true, but I don't have to be, like their best pal. That's not. And if you're setting that type of, we keep talking. It's like there was, oh gosh, she was like, we're a family. No, like, first of all, you don't necessarily want that family, because families are often dysfunctional. But second of all, it's like, but that should not be a requirement to have a functioning office, is that we are a family. It's like, we are colleagues. We should support each other. We should find a way to work in teamwork and work towards the same goal. We should, and the goal needs to be clearly articulated, so we all heard it. And we all heard that we're getting the same level of support. Nobody's being put in a position where somebody's going to do more work and cover the butt of somebody else that's not pulling their side, which often happens, that, the person of color ends up in a position where they don't, like, all of a sudden they're getting more work, and they feel like, okay, I can't really say anything about it. Right. And it's like, so anyway, I think I'm done. But if you're setting the bar at family, that's like that, you don't want that. And it's like, nobody.
Thing. That's a different thing. All right, I want to make this situation even a little bit more complicated with the part B of this scenario. So now in our scenario, the person who had concerns has now resigned, and now you have to fill that position and finally face the fact that, yeah, we've had a lot of turnover in this position, and really own that. But now you have the students involved and student organizations that are protesting, that are asking for an investigation. Now you've got to manage the interests of your staff, of your institution, and of your student body. How is that going to complicate matters? Do you have the tools you need for that? Where do you begin? Where are your loyalties? We'd love to hear directly from some of you folks about this sort of twist on the scenario here.
Well, I'll add in, it's, again, this is funny, the situations are coming up, because even on the high school level right now, with the fact that we are trying to figure out what is the plan for our institution from here on out, what is our mission in understanding how we can make it inclusive. We finally got a DI task force with advisories that include alumni of color. We have trustee members. We are trying to incorporate a whole bunch of not just the school, high school, but external support. And it's interesting is that the protest aspect is that we had a couple of our students create Black. I won't say my institution, but and they started Instagram as well as our international students, and that led to where, unfortunately, some of our colleagues, of course, who felt like they were being singled out, and that led to them, the insecurities of them, and, I don't want to speak out, I don't want to get caught in the saying the wrong thing, and but that was the students' way of sharing, like, this is my experience, this is how I'm feeling. And it's interesting is that what's killing me deep inside is that the fact that this topic of the Instagrams have not been touched upon in the school. We've talked about the full, like, how can we fix our institution and our history, and how can we move forward? But then there's the thought of losing donors, losing the fact that because we're, of course, thriving on our donors. Also the fact that our students, our faculty are scared to say, and I love the idea that we do, and we have a good portion of our faculty that are allies, but then you have to the point of an HR that doesn't even show up to a DI training. And I don't know if that's a legalization behind that. I'm not sure. I don't know that aspect, but there's just so much twisting. And the fact that that protest of our girls trying to promote that and say, we need help, we need to change, and the small steps, but it's not, it's like, it's almost like that line of like, we talk, but we never walk the talk. So, and that is what kills me every time. And this is now 2 years. This is my 3rd year here. And it's just, we keep talking about change, but then the action never happens. And we're just starting to do that action, but it's only minuscule. And we need to blow up almost everything. Who cares about the donors? Who cares? We need to move forward. And if we can't accept the idea that we're going to lose, we'll make it. But it's just, there's a lot of that where that's just really hard to have people turn around, especially the higher powers.
I'm thinking about like the smaller things. Like, why does it take something to be blown up for someone to take some action? Like the whole Black Lives Matters movement. All of that was happening before there was a huge movement. But now, since it's out in the public, it's in the media, it's like, oh, now we have to do something about it. And even in my office, and I won't name a school, but it's a large school on the West Coast, but we are all coming up with these task force, but there's no people or no white people on the task force. So how is that helpful? So us being reactive instead of being proactive, it just like, why are we still there? Why are we still doing that?
Well, I think even to that point, Lawanda, about the Black Lives Matter thing, it's just like, Black Lives Matter started with Trayvon Martin. A lot of y'all are just catching up.
How about slavery? It's happening way back then. You know, like, let's go all the way back. It's been going on. This is nothing new. Yeah. It's just now it's, you know, it's medialized and it's like, oh, it's in the public now. We got to talk about it. We got to act like we're really, you know, involved. And that's what kills me. It's like, what about everything else that happened before this?
There's such a fear of consequences, right? Like one of the examples here is that we've brought up is donors. We had this 2-week strike at Haverford, and there were lots of parents calling in saying that they're going to sue because their kids aren't getting the education that we promised them because we're 2 weeks off of class. And I'm great. I mean, we did not do everything right at Haverford, and part of why this strike happened is because there were too many task forces, right? So just to be honest, right, to be fair. But that being said, I was really happy that I had a president who said we're not going to worry about those phone calls from parents, right? We need to address the students and what they're concerned with. So I was grateful for that side of it, right? But that really is the issue is, you know, what prevents us from dealing with these sort of fears of consequences, and these are businesses in a sense, right? I mean, if we are getting sued, it's going to be 7-figure suits, and that's a lot of money. That's real money, and I don't want to pretend like that's not consequential. But I really appreciated the comment, the line of conversation of you know, why wouldn't donors want us to have solved problems, right? I mean, I just that's so perfect, right? Because we know why, because they don't see it as a problem, right? And how do we prevent it is, I mean, I'm only just summarizing great comments that are in the chat, frankly, but it's, you know, again, the phrase of the day for me is radical honesty here, because, and Tamara, you put this when this came up earlier, that the more honest you've been, the better relationships are with staff, right? That's short-term pain. You just have to realize that's short-term pain, right? So those parents are going to calm down when things are good. And they're not going to be good unless you make those real changes. They're not going to be good in your office unless you're being honest and being open. And another thing you said in earlier sessions, Derek, is vulnerability too, right? So in leadership roles, being vulnerable, right? Because it's not as though those mistakes aren't seen. You're just not acknowledging them, right? But they're seen and they're felt and they're understood. And then that's actually that radical honesty is such a great way to frame what actually is an important component of actually making real change and moving beyond task force and talking.
What other comments might y'all have about what would you do if now you can't fill the position, you've got the outcries, Any other comments kind of surrounding that? I know we're coming up on time. We've got about 4 minutes left, so just need to see anything else before we start to wrap this session up.
I would say acknowledgement of what the situation is, versus like we've talked about in the previous sessions. Don't just not say anything. That's worse. So walking boldly toward the issue and have it like right after George Floyd, like talking about it as, giving people space and not just acting like, how's the weather, Sally? That creates like a worse culture. I think that was one thing my boss and I talked about, and not having the staff of color have to be the ones to raise it either.
Right.
So right after that happened, 10 blocks from where I used to live, it hit home differently for me because I've got friends of color that live right there too. And so I got on the phone with my boss and said, we need to talk about this at staff meeting, or at least tell people. And so our solution was, let's get everyone together for 10 minutes and then go our separate ways, like virtually, because mentally some staff don't have the energy and they just need space and processing and not going through, recruitment plans. So, but he's white and he's in his 40s and he was like, I don't know if we should say anything. And I'm like, we need to, if you don't say anything, then it's complicit and worse. So anyway, just walking boldly toward the issue like you guys have talked about.
I love that.
And
Thanks, Sarah.
addressing the issue too, like talking about it or talking around it, like, okay, now you guys have voiced your opinion. That's great. We're moving on. Now let's fulfill the position. No, what was the reason why the person left? Like address that part, because if that doesn't get fixed, any new person you put in that position is going to do the same thing.
Well, I think to that point, LaWanda, like I so many places try to frame why someone left.
Yes.
Like around like, oh, it's personnel issues, we can't talk about it. And it's just like, everyone knows why so-and-so left. Like 4 of us knew that they were applying for jobs before they even left. Like, why are we doing this, right? But I think, one of the things that I keep hearing and have heard over and over, and I agree with it over, time again and time again, is be bold. And I think sometimes we don't know what being bold looks like. Right. And I think we just got to start talking. One of my favorite quotes is, I can't remember who said it, but my cousin had sent me some chocolates with this quote, so I'll never forget it. But it just says basically, share your truth, even if your voice shakes. Right. And I think so often
RBG.
Yes. Was it RBG?
Yep.
Okay. So, but the idea of, what, I don't have all the words, or I'm not as articulate as so-and-so. It doesn't take much to say like, that was wrong. What you said, I can't really put into words why it was wrong, but I do need to say like, that was wrong. I would like to ask, or pause to see what maybe you meant behind that. But I do need to name that was wrong. You can't say Oriental anymore. Like, that's just not an okay term, right? So it's just, but what did you mean by that? Were you actually talking about rugs? Because I was under the assumption that we were talking about people, but do you know what I'm saying? And so I think we just have to start practicing, being bold and trying to figure out what does bold look like for us. Bold is not Nancy Pelosi standing up at a table, like pointing at Donald Trump all the time.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah.
Sometimes it's that subtle comment while you're in a committee or something like that, or like you're with your person writing that little recommendation, and they're like, "He's so articulate. What the hell are you talking about?"
Ooh.
What the hell are you talking about? Like, it's like, do you mean charismatic? Do you mean like eloquent? But articulate? It's like, words matter.
English
It's like,
really well,
Like when you talked about being the angry Black woman, like I can't be passionate with my words, but someone else is, it's passionate, but I'm aggressive. Stop it.
Yep, that's so right. Well, one of the things, as we kind of wrap this up, I was messaging a little bit with Marcus. And first off, thank you all for engaging in these scenarios. We so appreciate kind of your comments and your insight, really great insight. This scenario is based on a real story. And so Marcus and I are going to share links to that real story. There are a few articles that you are more than happy and welcome to read. I mean, this is a real life situation that we pulled literally most of this from this. So there's just a couple of articles between both a Tribune article and another kind of local article here. And so just—
Yeah, we wish this was fiction. We wish this was
is not fiction. This is straight up real. All of this, all of the details on the scenario were pretty real, right? And so wanted to provide just kind of those links to you all. And I will say my thank you to all of you for being with us this evening and really taking the time to engage with us. Other panelists, if you want to wrap up, anything you want to wrap up with.
I just want to thank, I want to echo that thanks. I want to say we might have been small, but we were mighty. And I know that this was, I mean, some real suggestions came out of this. And, I mean, Dave and others, I mean, just, there are some that Marissa, there are some suggestions here that I think we have actual follow-up points. And so I really, this was fantastic in terms of, and thank you for coming to share with us.
Yes, and I put my email in the chat. I see the other panelists are following. Please do, if you feel so inclined, do reach out to us. We have a lot of other ideas, a lot of other perspectives that we'd be willing to share with you. And thanks again to Marie for helping to set this up. As always, we really appreciate that. And we appreciate you folks coming here and being willing to engage. I mean, this is what it takes, being willing to engage on these issues, and nothing else is going to work unless we all, take responsibility for speaking up and taking part and using that radical honesty on ourselves and on our surroundings. So thank you.
2 t-shirt slogans came out of tonight: radical honesty, and then Sarah's phrase, walk boldly towards solutions. That
I have to say, I did take that from paraphrasing from a TED talk of someone, an African-American woman, and I cannot remember her name. I want to say it's Monica something.
Yeah,
anyway,
Monica.
Educator. So I just want to give credit where credit's due.
We can also have the one about how's the weather, Sally.
Yes,
I almost said Karen, and then I just thought Sally would be trying not to be the Karen, right? That's what we should have on a t-shirt for white people.
And I want to thank Marcus for being kind of our special guest this evening too, because again, this case study, if you will, was based on, again, a really real situation. And he was gracious enough to be involved in this and allow us to use some of the details and kind of build out the scenario. So thank you, my friend.
Thank you for being here.
No, I'm grateful for you all. I'm grateful for this space. I was texting with Derek earlier today, and I was like, are you all gonna put your Venmo handles in there? Because these people need to pay you all money. So for those of you all, especially for those of you all who are white, I really would encourage you to reach out to those panels, not myself, but the fact that our colleagues are putting something like this on speaks to the passion, it speaks to the work, but this is also now free labor. And so don't think about it. I would encourage you not to think about it as I'm paying for their wisdom, I'm paying for their insights. Let me treat them to a cup of coffee. Let me treat them to a massage. Let me treat them to dinner one night or a glass of wine. This is hard and it's exhausting. And the only way we can get through it, I think, is together. But I'm just grateful to be in this space with you all and to be with folks who are committed to this work and to changing our profession.
All right, folks, go off. Have a great evening. Do your thing. It was so great to see you all. Thank you for your engagement this evening. We'll see
Much
you
love
soon.
to you all. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's bourbon time.
Thanks, guys. That was
Wow.
fantastic.
That was amazing. Marcus,